Okay, Shabbat Shalom. We're talking about Parsha Emor, which means to tell. And first I'm going to just start with a prayer merging the heavens and earth and heart and mind, which is key to understanding anything. L'shem yikud kedusha brihu ushinate bi'il ar'imu laihe shemuki b'vavke b'yuda shalom b'shem kozrael kolam. Amen. Parsha Emor is very, very deep. Superficially, they're talking about the role of the Kohanim, the high priests, but the teachings go way beyond that. That's what we call the literal level. So there are two sections the way I'm going to talk about. There's a lot more to it. I'm going to focus on two parts. The first part is to describe about the priests who aren't allowed to serve because they have some kind of physical defect. That doesn't seem fair. I mean, service, you're doing holy service, what matters if you have a physical defect? But, you know, in the world of, quote, social justice, which really isn't about justice, it doesn't seem fair. So let's look further, because whatever God does is for the best, and everything is very fair. So if you understand what everything that we're given is to elevate us spiritually. So we have, in a sense, a concept that we don't have a perfect world. We have a perfectly imperfect world with lots of blemishes. And that's our own personal world, which we've been given, but the world in general. And our task as spiritual aspirants, as spiritual aware people, is to clear our own blemishes and also simultaneously clear the blemishes of the world. Mostly here we're talking about our own blemishes. So the idea is we have an imperfect world, which is absolutely perfect, that God gave us, that everything God does is for the best, including all our blemishes. Now, we can complain about it, which doesn't get us very far, or we can talk about facing the blemishes as a spiritual test, and the word test in Hebrew means, it's really interesting, to uplift. What an interesting idea. Every test is an opportunity to uplift. Think about that. That's just mind-blowing when we think about it. So we are all given our blemishes, and the question is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to say, poor me? Or we can say, okay, there's a challenge, there's a test, it's an opportunity for upliftment, an opportunity to raise my consciousness. I'm going to talk about one blemish that I was born with, a congenital defect, which is clearly a karmic thing. And really what they are talking about is those priests were born with blemishes. There are certain karmas that they were giving a hint at through their blemish on the physical plane. So I was given this blemish of a congenital defect, spina bifida occulta, and I didn't really know about it until I was 18 and we were in high school football practice in the summer, and suddenly I was having all these spasms in my back. What is going on? So I went to our friend Teddy Fox, the bear football doctor, and he couldn't really figure it out, but he kind of designed a brace and so forth for it. And then when I got to college, I went to the Amherst football doctor, a professor of orthopedics at Yale. Okay, it was like, these are skilled people. They didn't have a clue. I'm not blaming anyone, because it wasn't time for me to understand. That's why. And so I went through playing with this brace, a lot of pain. Every day I'd have to get taped. If you ever had just one tape on your body and you pull it off, it hurts. How about being taped from your kind of mid-back to your lower back sacrum every day and having to pull that tape off? This was some interesting karma. Okay, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, I was like, what is this about? So I actually didn't get any resolution. So I had the pain of it all. And finally, I worked a lot on it during my psychiatry residency and I did such intense work and pretty much cleared it on the spiritual, emotional, mental, past life levels. Anything you get that you're born with, it's past life karma. Okay, let's just kind of be clear about that. And that, in a sense, is an understanding that comes through in this, because the Torah clearly includes past lives. I mean, clearly, without a doubt. Okay. So I've worked it out. What's going on? Now, it's 10 years later, okay? And my mother marries an orthopedic surgeon, Jerry Greenspan. He's good. He's fine. He looks at 2 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. He figures it out. This is your problem. How does that happen? Professor of orthopedics can't figure it out. Bear football, what happened? It's because I was ready to have it resolved. I'd done my work, had to be resolved in the physical plane, so he did a operation. I won't go into details, but I was in the hospital for a day. A certain amount of bone had to be cut off, and there we go. And between that clearing and doing yoga and later the tri-yoga every day, I've been paying fee for literally 50 years. Okay. That's called clearing karma. That's called clearing a blemish. That's what they were talking about. So it's very real. It isn't about something that happened 3,000 years ago. It's happening now. So we can draw from that a certain amount of understanding. Okay? Some people would say the purpose of the world is for our rectification. That's true. And we are all given these blemishes to rectify. Now, there's a paradox. There's always a paradox in the spiritual path. There's just no way of getting around it. If God is perfect, the creation is perfect, well then, how do we have a blemish that we have to work through? So we are given, and this is part of the spiritual understanding, the play between our free will, which chooses, hey, there's a blemish, I'm going to work on it, and no, it's perfect, don't touch it. This is a really spiritual challenge, but that's why we're given the play between free will and divine providence. And it's up to us at a certain level to make that distinction. Now, one way to do it is to see what's popping up in our lives, what is really challenging us, and face it. So the harder it is, a message, it's a blemish we have to work on. Put it that way. So that's a way of doing it. Of course, intuition is a way of doing it. I was doing it as a spiritual challenge, but also this pain. I got to work on the pain. So I had multiple inputs for why I was working on it. Okay, I didn't see it totally, as karma. I did see it as karma, but not totally. So that's a key concept then. We have a perfectly imperfect world. It's got lots of blemishes, and that's part of God's grand divine design for us to grow spiritually. And the way to approach it is to go forward into it, work it through, and through it. That's a gift to us. All our blemishes are a gift. So that's a key understanding that I draw out from Parsha Emor. Now there's another level which takes us a little bit beyond karma. I do want to mention one more thing. It comes out an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which is a seriously misunderstood teaching. It is not about revenge. This kind of comes up in here. It is simply saying, when you do an action, there are ramifications for that action, otherwise known as karma. And one way or another, that karma will be fulfilled in an equal, in a sense, opposite way. what it does say in the Torah is that there needs, again, not to be revenge, but there needs to be compensation. If you have an accident and you injure somebody, you need to compensate them. And that's actually how the system works. So I want to get away from this revenge idea. It is basically a statement about karma and the multi-levels of karma and how we need to look at that in approaching life. So this is a deeper meaning of that. And that's all part of this Parsha understanding. Now, the next level I want to talk about is really about liberation. So Emor means to tell. What are we telling? To tell the truth. And not just simple truth, but the truth of liberation. And that's something that in a way, is really key for us to understand. And part of that message in the truth of liberation is being aware that everything we do counts. Everything we do has meaning. So our support to the bigger picture of liberation is understanding that principle. Of a fun story here. Really two great Hasidic brothers, Reb Zusha and is that they were always getting in trouble, okay? And they got put in jail. And in the middle, in the cell, they didn't really exactly have plumbing in those days. There was a big pot where people went to the bathroom. And his brother, Iyar, kind of said, this is terrible. We can't do prayers. We can't do Torah because there's a toilet here. And Reb Zusha says, well, I don't think you have it right. Think this way. You are doing a good deed, a mitzvah, by not doing Torah, by not studying, but by observing the mitzvah that you can't do it. They were very happy. They started dancing and singing and having a good time. And everybody thought, these guys are crazy. What world are you from? And finally the guards came with all the commotion, and the other prisoners said, we don't know what's going on, but it has something to do with that pot there that we defecated in. So the guards took it away in a spiteful way, and the two brothers were very happy because now they could do prayer and Torah study. So that's how it works in a way. Everything that looks like an obstacle becomes a point of evolution. Now, back to the bigger picture, okay? So every action we do counts. So it's a message of being very conscious and very careful. And this is really what was being told to the Kohanim, the high priest. You're another standard of behavior. You're an example to everyone around you. You really have to be much more careful about what you do and what you say. Okay, and then after the temple fell, then the high priesthood went away, and it went really to the prophets. Okay, particularly Jeremiah and Eliyahu, Ezekiel, and their job now was to take that light that they had, like the priests were doing, and share it with the world. As things have changed, and we move past the prophetic stage, then we have the spiritual people, we'll call them tzaddiks. Their job now is to take the primordial light that they are generating, which is what we're really going to talk about here, that they're generating, and share that primordial light with the world to uplift themselves, everyone around them, and the whole world. So that's kind of the overview. Now within that, we're born with a certain amount of play of light and dark. Okay, and in the beginning there's a lot of God, and then a little bit there we have the darkness reigns over the chaos, which is the energy of evil, which is part of God now. We want to be clear about that. Evil is not separate from God. And then from that comes more light, a greater light that can dissolve the darkness. Now we go forward, but before we get to Adam and Hava, we have to look at light and darkness were separated. And you could build the light, and that building light helps to dissolve the darkness. Just like the meditations that we're doing every Thursday, and I encourage people to do every day, to create the light within yourself, the firepower of God, I call it, and let the darkness burn up. Remember, both are from God, and the darkness has a role. At the time of Adam and Hava, just to get the symbolism, when they ate of the apple, there was no longer a separation between light and darkness. It becomes one. And that gets really difficult. How do we undo that? That's kind of where we are, and that's why Parsha Emor speaks to it. Now, how does it speak to it? It talks about a process called Parisha. And what Parisha means is making a conscious effort to distinguish between light and dark and begin to separate that so that we focus on the light. Now, it doesn't make the darkness bad. It's part of the play. The darkness is there as a test for us. It's there to elevate us spiritually if we take the test, overcome the temptations. So it has its role. But Parisha is part of the role is learning to separate in our daily life our actions so that we are moving and creating actions that bring in more and more light to us and to the planet. So every action we do that's good, and we call mitzvahs in a way, it brings the power of light down into us. That's a really important thing. And that builds our own inner light, called the sacred feminine within, where that light emanates from, but the light comes in, and within us that inner light begins to build and build. And it begins to burn away the darkness within ourselves. Now, Parisha is now within ourselves beginning to separate the darkness and light within ourselves. We're reversing the process that Adam and Hava created, where they became one. And so this is a very, very profound teaching that we get in more. It's like, Parisha, we're separating outer world, but everything's outer becomes inner. The process of separating light and dark, rather than identifying with ourselves as light and dark. Okay? So we begin to more and more identify and build the light within ourselves. That's very big. It's huge. Because as we do that, as we separate them out, undoing the imbalance of Adam and Hava, we now are returning to the primordial light, which is what I was talking about with the prophets, okay? And we become generators of that primordial light. That's really the exciting thing here, okay? Emor is talking about tell the truth. Well, that is the truth. So how does that process work? So as we create more and more light, we begin to identify more with the truth of who we are. What is that? At one level, the oneness with God. At another level, the eternal nothing, which is prior to the oneness. So what I mean by that is, I am one with God is a very high state, very powerful, and is part of that whole liberation process. I am one with God. But there's another step too, which is the nothing, which is what I talk about a lot. At the place of nothing, there's no I amness. We're now beyond time, space, and I amness, and there's only the eternal presence, past, present, and future happening simultaneously. And that happens as a process. And I can't tell you the path for each person. I know for me, it happened by just literally praying and, in a sense, meditating into oblivion. So I didn't get it intellectually. It was what happened. So I don't claim, whatever, I was driven to do that. I didn't even have an idea that that's what was going on. Okay, so it doesn't happen in an order that we think it happens in. So people first began to see the light of God in all creation. Big step, really important. But eventually, there's a total emptiness within. Hebrew, we call it bitul hayash. They actually do describe it. Total emptiness. And when we are in that total emptiness, what's left? Only the divine presence moving through us. Only the generation of the divine light for the upliftment of all humanity. That's the deeper message of Emor. It is about, I'm going to call it oneness with God, oneness with the living planet, but ultimately Devaki Herut, where we, have the urge for God, but we really have the enlightenment where we become indistinguishable from the one. There's no us, no ego left. Now we have an ego that we have. Let's not get, so you don't get confused. We have an ego which is our tool of working in the world. That's what I'm doing now. I have a physical body, otherwise I couldn't talk to you. Okay, that's cool. That's not who we are. We're not the I amness. And so when we say I am one, we're still in that identity. But ultimately, bitul ha'esh, the total emptiness within. When we're in that total emptiness, only the light of God is coming through, and that becomes our directive. What does that mean? We have to surrender to the oneness of the light of God in a way that completely lets it come through us. And so, as I talk to everyone, this obviously is not a talk for millions of people, right? This is a talk for those who are listening here, are we, and I'm going to pose it to you, are you willing to make that commitment to even transcend I am one into the nothingness and be the bitul ha'esh, the complete surrendered vehicle for God's will? And in that way, be a generator of the primordial light of who we are into the world to uplift all of the world and literally the living planet. May be blessed with feeling empowered to actually make that choice, because that's our role, that's our goal. Why are we put on the planet? We're put on the planet to evolve spiritually, for sure. We're put on the planet to become one with God, but ultimately to merge in bitul ha'esh, the total emptiness. May you be blessed to be open to going in that direction and create that commitment in your life to simply let go of any idea of who you think you are and be amplifiers of the primordial light of creation onto the planet. Now I'm going to just look into the camera for a bit, sharing that light, and then you get to go into meditation. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, 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 Shalom. Amen.